it is easy to get lost in the dates and the names and all of that. But if you step back and take sort of the wide view, right, the 30,000 foot view, it goes like this. And I think Megan and Matt actually did a pretty good job of laying this out. But, so heading into after the election, so we're talking like early December, the intelligence community is ready to present a report to Barack Obama, basically saying, look, they really didn't do anything that they haven't done before, a little tinkering here and there, but evidence to suggest that, they were in this on behalf of Donald Trump, or that he was colluding with them in any way. And that report got pulled, basically. Obama said, no, I need a new report. And that was on December 9th. And so they were going to, and they rushed this report, and they did it maybe a month or something, and they released it in January. But what happened is that, and Megan pointed this out, so the narrative completely flipped on that day. And by that evening, they were leaking to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the next day you had stories in the paper saying Russia, interfered in the election, and they were doing it on behalf of Donald Trump. And mind you, there was no evidence to support any of this. And so that, to me, is really, when you just look at those facts alone, and I said this on our podcast today too, you look at the folks that were involved in this, right? James Clapper, John Brennan, who lied to the Senate, spied on the Senate. We now have evidence from what John Radcliffe released, a week or so ago, that looks like he perjured himself before the Senate committee by saying that the Steele dossier was not involved in this in any way. And then we found out, oh, by the way, he made sure it was included, overruled his subordinates who didn't want to include it. So, Susan Rice, James Comey, for God's sakes, was in this meeting. All these folks, right? Do we have any reason to trust them? Is there any reason we should be skeptical of what they say? Obama himself, released a statement, as you said, oh, this is a distraction, et cetera, et cetera. And I know Obama was always lauded as having the most scandal-free administration in history. Well, other parts of his administration, right? Remember IRS, Lois Lerner was weaponized against conservatives, right? There are other examples to point to where, Obama's administration was weaponized in certain ways. And so I believe everything that is being said here is, the questions that are being raised, the probes. This is not a distraction. This is a serious, serious issue. These are serious questions. They deserve serious answers. And, hopefully we'll get there. Now, do I think Obama's going to get, frog marched out of his Martha's Vineyard estate and, like some MAGA folks want? No, I don't think that'll ever happen. In some ways, everyone says nobody's above the law. I think perhaps, Barack Obama might be above the law, but also, I'm sure he has plausible deniability here. He can say, well, I just ordered a new intelligence assessment. I didn't coordinate any of this stuff, and it was kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod. They knew what he wanted and they went and did it. But it's an important story. It's a fascinating story. As you said, it's distracting from, and the administration is pushing it to distract from other stories that they don't like as much. But yes, it's been a bonkers few days, and I'm sure it was bonkers in the White House press briefing room as Tulsi Gabbard was there releasing new information and laying the stuff all out.
Well, yeah, and so the Real Clear White House correspondent Philip Wegman had a great question into Director Gabbard about Barack Obama. So he said he read the Obama statement that nothing undercuts the widely accepted conclusion that Russia worked to influence 2016 election, and asked, how do you respond to critics like Obama who say that the admin is conflating apples and oranges here, conflating allegations of actual hacking of voter machines and allegations of interference generally. And Tulsi sort of unloaded after that question and said, I think it's a disservice to the American people that former President Obama's office and others who are criticizing the transparency that is being delivered by releasing these documents said that they were trying to deflect away from their culpability in what is a historic scandal. And then Caroline Leavitt, by the way, stepped up to the podium after that and said there needs to be accountability for weaponization. that we've seen, and basically called for Pulitzer Prizes to be stripped from the media later in the briefing. So, Tom, just on the politics of this, the administration seems to think this is a real winner. I think it's an extremely important story. And, having worked at the Federalist while all of this was happening, for the most part, I've seen it up close and have seen the reporting up close. And I do think it's really significant, but I also know that it's incredibly granular and hard to follow. And it's the same basic story that has been told and dismissed by the media over and over again for almost a decade now. And people are already kind of aware of it. So what do you make of the political impact of, Gabbard seemed to think, when she really leaned into that question, seemed to think they have something powerful.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, this is one of those stories that, it's two movies. We're living in two separate realities. And what you think about the story and what you believe is based on where you sit politically. I'm sure, Democrats are fully in line with Obama's statement. They think this is, just bullshit. It's a distraction. It's a smokescreen. It's a smear against, to try and hide and change the subject. And I'm sure, all of Trump supporters believe very deeply that he's right. Obama was the one who directed this and sent his minions to go gin up evidence, this sort of fake evidence that undermined his entire presidency, the first term anyway. And so, do independents, are they open-minded about this? Can they be swayed? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? And to your point, it gets pretty granular pretty quickly. And so I'm just not sure that. And as you mentioned, right, the media played a real or central role in propagating this narrative, right, in the beginning. And they show no interest in really sort of, doing the same thing in the other direction now. As this information is coming out, yes, the New York Times wrote a sort of obligatory story about, Tulsi Gabbard comes at Obama with new documents or something, but certainly not the sort of, feeding frenzy and drip, drip, drip that we were subjected to with leaks about, the Russia collusion thing for months and months, years actually, by all of the major networks and all of the major anchors and all the major papers. So because it's not getting that same, yes, if you watch Fox News or if you're in the sort of conservative media ecosystem, it's getting a lot of attention. But outside of that, I don't know that it's breaking through, especially with people who are maybe, sort of not super ideological or super news driven, and they're focused on their lives. So, the other issue that I would say is that the reason that the administration finds themselves in a bit of a, sticky wicket is that here they're pushing for full, total, transparent disclosure about all this stuff, get the truth out, right? And then you got the other competing story, which is the Epstein files. And there it's kind of like, well, yeah, well, we'll release, I've instructed Pam Bondi to release anything that is legitimate, but Barack Obama made everything up. So none of that stuff is real anyway. So, it's not, they'd be on more solid ground if they were pushing for, sort of total transparency across the board, but they're not. And so, in that sense, people will probably view it as maybe a little bit more political.
Yeah, this is a big question because fundamentally these two stories, as crazy as this sounds, I think are about a similar basic issue, which is or a basic possibility, which is that unaccountable people in the intelligence community, unaccountable bureaucrats, basically in the intelligence community who are not elected, unless we include Barack Obama in this, and maybe Donald Trump, are that there's so much happening in the shadows with information trading that is affecting significantly our politics in ways that we never get the information, and if we do, it's multiple years after the fact, and we're forced to sort of put the puzzle pieces together and find the bigger picture out ourselves for years into the future, as we are still doing with the Kennedy story and the MLK story and the RFK story and all of these different situations. So on the one hand, though, And this is, I think, quite interesting. So the Wall Street Journal drops a story this afternoon. This is F1. They say the Justice Department told Trump in May that his name is among many in the Epstein files. This contrasts with what Donald Trump himself told reporters outside the White House. Just a couple, I think it was just within the matter of recent days. So I think like the last few weeks that no, he hadn't heard that from Pam Bondi. So that's a little bit of an issue for the White House. But buried in this story is the notion that Dan Bongino is like deeply frustrated that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino had wanted more information to be disclosed to the public. But Tom, now that Director Gabbard is like on this odyssey to disclose as much information about potential wrongdoing on behalf of the Obama administration as possible. If anything, it seems to me that yes, it's taking oxygen away from the Epstein story. I myself was going to ask Epstein questions that didn't get asked during the briefing. I'll be back there tomorrow, so I hope to ask those questions. But at the same time, what it really has the effect of doing, it seems to me, is rallying people internally behind the president. It's sort of a morale boost for the MAGA movement. Am I wrong on that?
I don't know. I mean, this is the first issue where Trump supporters, I'm talking about the Epstein case, where Trump supporters disapprove of the way he's handling it. I mean, normally, you look at any issue, any event, they're all in, they support the president, overwhelmingly. And this is the first time we've seen data suggest that Republicans, and obviously lots of Democrats for political reasons, but the first time Republicans have said, yeah, I'm not really thrilled with the way that he's handled this. And it, because, and we've talked about this in the past, the way that this administration, Pam Bondi going out there saying, I've got it on my desk, and we've got, thousands of videos and all these things. They just oversold the idea, and then they tried to walk it back, and that just creates more questions. And so, does it rally the folks internally who've been sort of, under assault over the last couple of weeks, the Tulsi Gabbard stuff? Yes, it does, and it gives them an opportunity to shift the narrative. But look, this thing isn't going away, and I know Mike Johnson dismissed the House early and is hoping that they can go home.
Sure did.
And hoping they can go home, and after 4 or 5 weeks, the temperature will get lowered. But I will be shocked if some of these Republican representatives don't go home and have town hall meetings and get an earful from their constituents about the Epstein stuff and why they, where are the files, where is all this stuff? I think some of this stuff is, I think we know Trump's names are in those Epstein files, right? I mean, I think that's already pretty well established, and I think everybody kind of, that's baked into all of the political calculations. Now, how often he's mentioned and in what context he's mentioned, those are important details, and it'll be embarrassing for him if that information comes out and it doesn't shed a great light on him. But at the end of the day, it is hard for them to fight this sort of dual fight and say, look, we want total transparency over here, not as much transparency on this, and stop talking about Epstein. He's old. I mean, the way that Trump has gone about this and trying to say look, Barack Obama made up all those files and James Comey made up all those files. Well, I don't think anybody believes that. I don't think that's really passing the smell test with a lot of folks, including a lot of his supporters.
Right. I think that's all generally true. And this is something that you caught from Politico. Let's put F3 on the screen. We're going to play Tale of Two Headlines. This is the best game that exists. And here's Politico. Original headline, House Dems find their mojo with the Epstein saga. Tom flagged that. And then the headline today, you get F4, Democrats are running circles around Republicans on Epstein. And Tom, what's interesting about that is they kind of are trying to, but like Hakeem Jeffries the other day, we played it on Monday's show, he about fell on his face during a press conference when he was talking about how Democrats historically haven't cared about Epstein. And this was his attempt to dunk on Trump about Epstein. So yes, it's a political opportunity for Democrats, but the idea that they're actually making the most of it seems crazy right now.
Yeah, I mean that political headline is just silly, right? um, is it a political boon for them? Yes. Are they playing it as best they can to their advantage? Sure. But you also have, Pramila Jayapal was on CNN. Jamie Raskin was on Morning Joe and was like, this Epstein thing is it's so important. And then Joe Scarborough, to his credit, and I'm very critical, have been a critical of Joe, said, well, if it's so important, why didn't you do anything about it with the 4 years that you were running the entire government? And Jamie Raskin literally had no answer. He just sort of sputtered like a moron for like 30 seconds. And that's the problem. They don't have the moral high ground here. This is purely political and transparently so. And I think everybody knows that. And so I think for that reason, they're not able to make as much of it and move the needle on this as much as they would if they had been fighting for the release of these documents while Joe Biden was president. But they didn't do that. And so it's just disingenuous for them to be out there, shouting from the rooftops about what an important issue this is and how critical it is that this stuff gets released.